Heart. We have been sharing together, Pastor Phil and I have been sharing together in a series concerning living in the kingdom of heaven, eternity today. We've joined a long ways. We've journeyed together. If you've been with us with each week, we've been adding another chapter or another page to it. But this morning I want to go back to the beginning. So we are in the Sermon on the Mount, and where Jesus started with the sermon. Do you remember? Jesus started with the Sermon on the Mount, and he's speaking. It's probably one of the longest sermons that we have recorded that Jesus preached, actually. Segments of the particular Sermon on the Mount, this is repeated in other places. Jesus uses similar things at other places throughout his ministry in quotations that he already said in another place. So we want to begin with the opening. And he opens up with the Beatitudes, the blesseds, right? The blesseds. These Beatitudes, the blessedness in the kingdom of heaven, has nothing to do, Jesus would tell us, by the blessing, has nothing to do with our circumstances or who we are. In fact, if you're spiritually bankrupt, if you're overwhelmed by the sadness of life, if you're the kind of person who doesn't stand for yourself or assert your rights, that's meekness, by the way. If you're upset or broken over the injustice in the world and around you, you're crying out in your hunger for righteousness. Those who have a soft heart, you're always giving to others and easily taken advantage of by needy people. Oh, yeah, yes, you're merciful, right? Those who are concerned with having a clear conscience, the pure in heart, right? Those who care more about diffusing conflict than any other objective. The peacemaker, right? Those whose convictions and actions get you in constant trouble with those who make the rules. You know, persecuted for righteousness' sake. Jesus said, if you're in any of those categories, you are blessed when it comes to the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you in the kingdom of heaven. So whatever you fill that blank with, whoever you consider not blessable in your life, in the kingdom of heaven, they can be blessed. And you can be blessed because Jesus says, blessed are you in the kingdom of heaven. He turns to two specific areas, in that you are salt and you are light. You are light. And we are to be that in this present evil world because we are living between two ages. As followers of Jesus, we're not only living in this present evil world, but we are living and seeking to live in the kingdom, the age to come. And so we're called to be salt and light in this present evil age. Living like Jesus in both character and ministry. Salt and light. The kingdom life in Jesus comes from character that should produce the thirst in other people. The way we live our lives as salt in this world should produce a thirst in other people to ask the question, well, you know, what's different about you? It's because your character, it's not like others. And also, that from character should produce a thirst in others and a blessing to others with generosity. That's light. Jesus said this, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father that's in heaven. So you're pouring out, you're being light, you're being generous. You are just as Jesus was generous in coming, though he was rich, he became poor, that through his poverty we may be rich. And that's not having to do with our physical condition or how much we have, right? The blessing of God and being the light to this world and becoming like Jesus, and that would be the light. The light. And Jesus points out concerning the righteousness of the Pharisees in verse 20. Chapter 5 of Matthew, verse 20 says, "For I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes or the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." The righteousness of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law was performance. That's how they define righteousness. If I am an obedient to the law, then I'm declared righteous. It's my action. But that's not the righteousness that exceeds the righteousness of scribes and Pharisees that Jesus will go in more detail about and has already in our study together. The righteousness that Jesus that speaks about is a righteousness not by performance. That righteousness that Jesus is speaking about has nothing to do with that at all. It has nothing to do with earning the right to be in the kingdom of heaven. That's the Pharisees. They obey the law and they practice the law in order to be in the kingdom of heaven. That is how they defined righteousness. But Jesus doesn't define it that way. Jesus defines righteousness in a different way. It's not something that could be earned. It's by His grace. It has nothing to do with us. It's all about Him. The grace of God, as we've defined it, the grace of God, the practical way in which the grace of God enters our life and begins to change us and transforms us is that the grace of God is the ability to live a life that we could not live on our own. That's God's grace. God and God's grace, living in the kingdom of heaven, seeking to live in the kingdom of heaven now, and as if the future is here in our lives, is realizing that it's not by ourselves. There's no way that I can perform, that we can perform certain things, and in the performance somehow change my heart, our heart. That's why the need for the grace of God. God's grace, He gives us the ability to live a life that we could never, ever live on our own. Jesus begins to deal with the heart of the Pharisees and us too. As Pastor Phil mentioned or spoke of the beginning, he then turns to the idea of anger as a big issue. Jesus quotes and he says, "Thou shalt not murder." To the Pharisees, said, "Well, I've never killed anybody." So they think they're pretty good off, pretty good. But that's not, Jesus then equates anger with murder. With murder. Anger, from Jesus' point of view, anger that's unchecked is murder. It becomes an endless, ends up holding a human beings who is created in the image of God with contempt. With contempt. And as that proceeds on, the other person, we become And we say of the other person, I'm better than you. And we hold them in contempt. And even gets to the place, Jesus would say, to the place of seeing the other person as not human. Not human. They're worthless. They're not redeemed. They can never, ever be redeemed. And we take in the place of God. And we say, and you've heard people say it to one another, go to hell. And that's exactly what Jesus is saying. That's the heart. And we've seen that in our world throughout the world history. Because we look, you see, what happens with that is it becomes exponential in the world. This idea of the corruptness of the heart and treating other people like they're worthless, they can't be redeemed, there's no change, there's nothing. And it becomes exponential when it comes out in terms of world history. Ever heard of genocide? Genocide in Rwanda occurred. In Cambodia, under the Khmer Rouge, the killing of millions of people because he held these individuals as worthless tools and people to be used. They're not people. They're not even human beings. In our nation, we went through in our own history of our country, slavery, right? It was slavery. What did that happen? It was saying a whole group of people were worthless only to be used. Human beings, they're not human. Germany did this through Germany and the Holocaust, did that to the Jew and said they're not people. They're not human. And it makes it easy to kill and destroy them. And it all begins with anger. Anger. Unchecked anger continuing on. And Jesus is dealing with the heart. In our society today, have you ever heard of human trafficking? What's that about? Human trafficking, again, sees a group of people to be used, to be manipulated, in order to vent and be able to benefit their own pleasures and desires of a whole group of people, because, no, they're not human. They're only to be used. And Pastor Phil reminded us that no law will change that heart. Thou shalt not murder, yes. But Jesus is saying it's more than that. It's the heart. You see? No law would change this because it's all found in the human heart. Change the heart, change the people. And Jesus does that. Jesus does that. He begins to change the heart. Whatever comes out of the heart determines our life. And we cannot truly live in the kingdom of heaven and be angry. It is more important to be reconciled to others than any religious action. Worship, giving, offering sacrifice. It's more important for reconciliation to occur than that act of religious action. And you probably wonder, when was I going to get to our text today? All right, here we go. We're getting into it. Jesus turns again. He's still dealing with the heart and the living in the kingdom. And he moves to a very interesting passage next. Matthew 5:27-30. And he begins to talk about and turns the heart against, I don't want to offend anybody, sexuality. Sexuality. Listen to what Jesus says next. Matthew 5:27-30. You have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gorge it out, throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than to your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right eye causes you to stumble, cut it off. Throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Now the Pharisee and the teachers of the law, hearing this, they hear, don't commit adultery, right? Well, they can say that. They can say they've never done it because they defined adultery according to the action or the act, doing it. And so if I don't cross that line, then I'm considered righteous. Right? That's what they're thinking. In fact, they went so far as to not to cross the line. They came up with some real interesting things to try to do in order to not to cross the line. They got to the place where I should not even look at another man's wife at all. Not even a glance. And so they came up with all these different rules in order not to do that, right? For instance, because the Pharisees were known to set up fences up if I away from the law, the fulfillment of the law, they'll set up these fences, and they called in our text earlier, the tradition becomes the law for the Pharisee. And so they set up these fences in order not to cross the line. So one of the things that they decided to do is, in order not to look at another man's wife and not break the law, wives were forced to wear a veil, cover up everything. Don't want to do this. I mean, you can't look. You can't even glance. That's not good. They also ended up doing some things, interestingly enough, in order to avoid looking. If two couples were meeting each other on the bridge, for instance, instead, so that the wife of each party couldn't see, the husbands couldn't see the wives or glance at them, what they would do is the men would be in the center and they put the ladies on the outside so that as they're crossing together that there's no glancing. See? Isn't that crazy? I think so, but anyway. They would do all these things and they put these fences up so it became just a glance as a possibility of breaking this law. The law. In fact, in church history, one of the reasons for the monastic movement, the monks and so forth going into a monastery and so forth, one of the reasons they did that was to avoid worldly desires and lust. So if I'm out here away, I'm going to lock myself up. But you soon learn that has nothing to do about the place, right? Worldly lust. If you have worldly lust out there, you're going to have it inside the monastery. Why? Because it's about the heart. It's about the heart. Now, Jesus tells us that it's not about action, it is about the heart. Jesus tells them that it's not a passing glance. It's not a momentary look. But it's a look that produces an impulse of desire that is cherished until it becomes passion. There's nothing wrong with desire. You can have good desire, bad desire. But Jesus is saying it's if looking at a woman lustfully with the intent of producing an impulse within that brings about passion. That's what he's talking about. It's not this passing glance. It's not, oh, I never look at a lady. No, it's not that at all. It's about the heart. One who continuously intends lustfully to look at a woman. You say? It's from the heart. Now, Martin Luther, one of the reformers, said this: you can see the birds fly overhead, but don't let them make a nest in your hair. Right? That's the temptation. But here's the thing. No dress code can fix this. Let me say it again. No dress code can fix this. It makes a woman an object of lust. It treats a woman and dehumanizing her. Something to be used for personal pleasure. You cannot live in the kingdom of heaven and have the heart. You cannot live this way. Jesus wouldn't have us live that way. Because it's independent from Him. Then Jesus would say these words: if your right eye causes you to stumble, gorge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. Throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for the whole body to be going to hell. What's interesting, the word that Jesus uses for the word stumble has the idea for scandal and a trap. The one person can get his eye in a trap. His hand would be in a trap. Why? Because the continued looking, gazing lustfully. It's a trap. It's a trap. Now, anybody gone fishing? I've tried my hand in Wisconsin going fishing, and I hadn't done it since we moved here from Wisconsin. But something I learned about fish, and maybe you can get this too. Why do you put a bait on the hook? Think about it. Right? To catch the fish, right? So you put the bait on the hook, maybe it's a worm, maybe it's something else, and you throw it into the water, and you cast it, right? Now, what does the fish do? Now, the fish may see that morsel and look at it really close. It'll go right by it, maybe. Pretty soon, it might come back. Oh, that looks good, doesn't it? That worm looks good. And so, pretty soon, it may come back and forth a few times, right? And sometimes the fish would begin to circle it. And the circle becoming a little closer. And then what happens? That thing bites, right? They're pulled out of the water, and what happens to them? They die. Right? That's this. That's what Jesus is talking about. It's a matter of the heart and relationship. As long as I continue with a lustful gaze, I will be caught in a trap. And my life will become smaller, and hell is produced. It's like going to the dentist. Okay? Going to the dentist. And you go to the dentist and they discover, you got a cavity, right? Now, if you leave the cavity there in the tooth and you don't get it extracted by the dentist, it'll affect the next tooth. And pretty soon the next tooth, to the place that it affects your whole body, right? You have to get it cut out. Jesus says you pluck out your eye, cut your hand off. But here's the thing. Outward mutilation will serve the purpose of only for the moment and preventing the outward act. Right? But it will not stop the desire. Because it's not about the hand or the eye. It's what's in the heart, right? This look kills, demeans, dehumanizes. It turns an object into a thing to be used and not someone to be truly loved. And here's something about that gaze. It doesn't show love or respect for a wife, a daughter, a sister, fiance. It leads to what is called inordinate desire or sexual sin. And in modern terms, it's called pornography. You hear me? It's called pornography. And pornography at its worst. Our culture is saturated with these kinds of traps. Advertisements sometimes sold a thing based upon sex appeal. We object to women being raped, for instance, on college campuses, but there's no thought about the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders, right? And their movements on the field. That's not a problem. It's sports, right? Just because it's sports, it's okay, right? We object to, and I'll make sure I get this correct, Abercrombie and Fitch. Everybody know what that is? Okay. Maybe. Catalog, right there. It's pornographic, right? But what does our society do? Well, we still buy the merchandise, right? We talk about Britney Spears and Miley Cyrus in our culture and says it's okay. It's got to be okay because I have a daughter who begins to imitate them. in the way they're dressed and dress them up really like they dressed up. That's our culture. Children can be defended because they're naive. But that's not an excuse for our parents, right? A man can read Playboy magazine, and when he is caught, what does he say? I only read it for the articles. Right? You see how the heart? You see it? I only read it for the articles. We talk about another area that I think is kind of interesting. We talk about adult-only movies. Right? No children should be watching this. That's what we say in our culture. But what are we keeping them from seeing? That it's okay for us to see. Think about it. See how disjointed we are in our culture today? How many of you remember President Jimmy Carter? You guys know him, right? Remember back, he was doing an interview with Playboy magazine, and he mentioned in the article that he had lust in his heart. Do you remember that? And you realize how much fun the person that was doing the interview made fun of him for that? And all here was the President of the United States that said he had a problem in that area. And that's true in the culture today. It's no big deal. Doesn't matter. That's the corruptness of the human heart. Without Jesus. Right? Something has to happen. Something has to change. We must be surrendered to Jesus. We need to change our heart and live in relationship with the King of the kingdom. The position that we should have in living in the kingdom of heaven in this present evil age of the corruptness of relationships between male and female relationships should be that we're doing it in that relationship on our knees in prayer and not surfing the net for porn sites. We should be praying. We should be parents who teach and modeling both respect and love of the opposite sex. And not one who would be manipulating or leading in order to get and satisfy our pleasure. And thus, our married men and women being accountable to one another in godly relationships with other men and women. Because that's the answer. No law, thou shalt not commit adultery, Jesus is saying, doesn't solve the heart problem. No law changes the heart. You don't cross the line. Okay, good. But knowing not cross the line doesn't change it. The heart. Because Jesus says it's about the heart and what comes out of it that forms our character and doing good things, being the light in the world. We are totally to be different than the culture in which we live. The apostle said this, be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may be able to know what is acceptable and the perfect will of God. And it begins with surrender to Jesus, a living sacrifice, and the continued renewing of the mind, different thoughts, different direction, growth, change of heart. And it begins what Jesus is dealing with. So far, we've been to. It's about the heart. The heart of the matter is the heart. Let's turn and let us pray together. And as we do, we have a number of individuals I'm sure you brought here to this place in your own heart to pray for. I'd like you to take the time as the organ plays to really think about where you are. Maybe you bought into that advertisement and went ahead and bought something because you were just turned on about it. Maybe we need to think about what we should be putting into our lives. Make the tree good, and the fruit would be good. Take this moment to contemplate and think, talk to the Lord, the issues of your own heart today. Let's pray.